I'm Helen. It's a word that's supposed to conjure up feelings of warmth, belonging, and unconditional love. But for me, family has always been a tangled, thorny vine, full of hidden barbs and unexpected twists. Growing up in the sprawling suburbs of Houston, I always felt like I was living on the periphery, an extra in a play where my older sister, Emily, was the star. The cracks in our family foundation appeared early, when my parents' marriage imploded in a spectacularly messy divorce when I was just 5. I can still vividly recall the shouting matches that echoed through our house, the slammed doors, the palpable tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. And then, my dad packed his bags, moved to Ohio, and started a new family, leaving a gaping hole in my life and a lingering sense of abandonment. But the divorce was just the first act in this family drama. My dad, you see, always harbored doubts about me, about whether I was truly his. He never said it outright, but the whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle insinuations, they all wove a tapestry of uncertainty around my identity. It was like I was living with this invisible question mark hovering over my head, a constant reminder that I might not truly belong, that I might be an outsider in my own family. This seed of doubt planted by my father grew into a towering oak tree of insecurity within me. It affected everything: my self-esteem, my relationships, my sense of identity. I constantly sought validation, craved approval, and felt a deep-seated fear of rejection. And the worst part? My dad's doubts manifested in a very tangible way. He poured all his resources, all his love, and all his support into Emily, while I was left to navigate the choppy waters of adolescence with a leaky life raft and a whole lot of emotional baggage. Emily, she was the quintessential golden child. Smart, beautiful, successful. She excelled in school, effortlessly charming teachers and classmates alike. She got a scholarship to a prestigious university, where she met her equally successful husband. They built a picture-perfect life in Ohio, complete with a sprawling house, designer clothes, and annual vacations to exotic locales. Their Christmas cards were practically a magazine spread, showcasing their perfect family and their seemingly perfect life. Meanwhile, I was stuck in Houston, working a dead-end retail job, struggling to pay my rent and put food on the table. I felt like I was living in a perpetual state of catch-up, always striving, always hustling, but never quite reaching the level of success and stability that seemed to come so easily to Emily. Don't get me wrong, I love my mom. She's been my rock, my constant through all the turmoil. She worked her butt off to provide for me, sacrificing her own dreams to make sure I had a roof over my head and food on the table. But raising a kid on a single income in Houston isn't easy, and we always had to scrimp and save, make do with what we had. Our vacations were camping trips in a rusty old van, not 5-star resorts in the Caribbean. Our Christmases were modest affairs, with handmade gifts and a small artificial tree that had seen better days. As I got older, the resentment towards my dad and the feeling of injustice grew. I watched Emily build her life, her career, and her family with a seemingly effortless grace. She had the financial security, the loving husband, the adorable kids, the social status, and here I was, stuck in a rut, feeling like I was constantly treading water, just trying to stay afloat. It wasn't just about the material things, though. It was about the emotional support, the unwavering belief in my potential, the feeling of being truly loved and accepted for who I was, flaws and all. Those were the things I craved, the things I felt had been denied. I yearned for a father who was proud of me, who saw my worth, who celebrated my achievements no matter how small. And then there was the money, the inheritance. When my dad passed away a few years ago, he left Emily a hefty sum, something like $400,000. It was like a slap in the face, a final confirmation that I was, and always would be, the less favored child. She had more money than she could ever need, while I was living paycheck to paycheck, constantly worried about making ends meet. It felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke on me, like I was destined to always be the underdog, the one who had to fight for every scrap of happiness, every bit of financial stability. And the worst part? I couldn't even talk to Emily about it. The wall between us, built on years of unspoken resentment and a nagging sense of injustice, was too high, the chasm too wide. We were sisters, bound by blood, but separated by a lifetime of hurt, and misunderstanding. So like I said, my sister Emily is doing pretty well for herself. She's a lawyer in Ohio, married to a doctor, with a big house, fancy cars, and a seemingly endless supply of designer handbags. Basically, the whole American dream package, gift-wrapped and delivered with a cherry on top. Me? Not so much. I'm working retail in Houston, barely making ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment that's seen better days. It's not that I'm lazy or anything, it's just life hasn't exactly handed me the best cards. The whole money thing has always been a sore spot between Emily and me. See, when our dad passed away a few years ago, she inherited a huge chunk of change, like $400,000. It was money he'd set aside for her, a trust fund or something years ago when he still acknowledged my existence. I didn't get a dime. Not that I expected to, really. He always favored Emily, even before the divorce. Always thought I wasn't his, that whole "you don't look like me" thing. It stung, even as a kid, to see the blatant difference in how he treated us. Growing up, Emily got the new clothes, the fancy summer camps, and the private college fund. I got hand-me-downs, scorching summers in the city, and a mountain of student loan debt. It wasn't that my mom didn't love me. She did the best she could, but it was hard not to feel like I was always playing second fiddle, the forgotten child, the one who didn't quite measure up. Anyway, fast forward to a few months ago. Our house in Houston was falling apart. The roof leaked like a sieve every time it rained. The plumbing was so shot that we had to cross our fingers every time we flushed the toilet, and the whole place was basically held together with duct tape, prayers, and my mom's sheer stubbornness. We were desperate. We needed a serious cash injection to make the place livable, to avoid having the city condemn it and leave us homeless. Naturally, we thought of Emily. I mean, she had the money, right? And we're family. So I called her up, explained the situation, laying it on thick about the leaky roof, the mold growing in the bathroom, and the fact that we were basically one bad storm away from living in a tent. I asked if she could help us out, hoping that maybe, just maybe, some of that sisterly love would kick in. Her response: less than enthusiastic. She didn't outright say no, but she started hemming and hawing about her own expenses, her kids' college funds, the new swimming pool they were installing, and how she needed to talk to her husband. It felt like pulling teeth just to get her to agree to send a few $1,000s. Over the next few weeks, it was like a constant negotiation. We'd send her estimates for repairs, meticulously itemized and documented, and she'd counter with a lower amount, questioning every single expense. It was humiliating, like we were begging for scraps, like we were charity cases instead of family. I started to resent her. Here we were, struggling to keep a roof over our heads, and she was nickel and diming us, acting like she was doing us a huge favor by throwing a few crumbs our way. It just didn't feel like family. It felt like business, cold, calculated, and devoid of any warmth or compassion. And it sucked. The whole situation left a bitter taste in my mouth. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the feeling of being abandoned, of being less than, of not being worthy of her love and support. It was about the realization that maybe, just maybe, blood isn't thicker than water after all. The idea of getting married was a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, I was ecstatic. My fiancé, David, was everything I'd ever wanted: kind, funny, supportive, and head over heels in love with me. But on the other hand, the looming specter of wedding planning filled me with a sense of dread. Weddings, as everyone knows, are notoriously expensive, and my bank account was looking as barren as the Sahara Desert. I knew I couldn't rely on my dad for financial help. He had made it abundantly clear that his financial obligations began and ended with Emily and her picture-perfect family. Asking my mom for a loan was out of the question. She was barely making ends meet herself, juggling 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. The thought of adding to her burdens filled me with guilt. That left Emily. The thought of asking her for money made my stomach churn with a potent cocktail of pride and resentment. It wasn't just about the money itself. It was the unspoken acknowledgement that I needed her help, that I was somehow less successful, less capable. It felt like admitting defeat, like waving a white flag in the ongoing competition that had always simmered beneath the surface of our sisterly bond. But I had to swallow my pride. I needed that money, and I was willing to do what it took to get it. So I called Emily, crafting a carefully worded narrative that tugged at her heartstrings without revealing my true intentions. I told her about the much-needed repairs to our house, the leaky roof that threatened to turn our living room into an indoor swimming pool, the faulty wiring that sparked and sputtered ominously, the crumbling foundation that made the whole house feel like it was about to slide down the hill. Emily, bless her heart, was sympathetic. She agreed to help, but not without a healthy dose of skepticism and a side of patronizing advice. She questioned the costs, the contractors, and the urgency of the repairs. I could practically hear the unspoken judgment in her voice, the subtle implication that I was somehow irresponsible, incapable of managing my own finances. I gritted my teeth and played along, sending her photos of minor repairs, inflating costs, and even fabricating a few invoices for good measure. It was a risky game, a delicate dance of deception, but I felt justified. After all, she had inherited a fortune from our dad, a fortune that should have been split between us. This was just a small way of leveling the playing field, of claiming what was rightfully mine. With Emily's money trickling into my account, I was able to make some necessary repairs to the house. But the bulk of the funds went towards my real goal, my dream wedding. I booked a beautiful venue overlooking the city skyline, hired a talented photographer who promised to capture every magical moment, and splurged on a stunning designer dress that made me feel like a princess. I envisioned a fairy tale wedding, a day filled with joy, laughter, and a touch of extravagance that would make even Emily envious. I knew I was playing with fire, but I convinced myself that Emily would never find out. She rarely visited Houston, and I was careful to keep my social media posts vague, avoiding any mention of the wedding. I was living a double life, a carefully constructed facade of financial need masking my true intentions. But as the wedding day approached, a nagging sense of guilt started to creep in. I had lied to my sister, manipulated her kindness, and exploited our already fragile relationship for my own gain. The weight of my deception pressed down on me, threatening to suffocate the joy I felt about marrying the man I loved. I tried to push those thoughts aside, telling myself that I deserved this happiness, that I had earned it after years of struggling in Emily's shadow. But deep down, I knew that my actions had consequences, and that the truth, like a pesky weed, had a way of finding its way into the sunlight. Little did I know that the truth would soon come crashing down around me, shattering my carefully constructed fairy tale and leaving me to face the consequences of my actions. And those consequences, as I would soon learn, were far more devastating than I could have ever imagined. So, there I was, engaged to the man of my dreams, picturing a beautiful wedding, the whole 9 yards. I could practically hear the wedding march playing, feel the soft tulle of my dress against my skin, and taste the champagne bubbles as I imagined myself twirling on the dance floor with my new husband. But with our limited finances, it felt like a fairy tale, a distant dream shimmering just beyond my grasp. My mom and I talked it over late one night, huddled over a pot of chamomile tea in our tiny kitchen. We both knew Emily wouldn't be thrilled about funding a lavish celebration. She'd probably lecture us about budgeting, responsible spending, and the importance of starting married life without debt. She'd probably suggest a courthouse wedding followed by a potluck dinner in our backyard, with paper plates and plastic forks. But I wanted that dream wedding. I wanted the beautiful dress, the one I'd been sketching in my notebook since I was a little girl, with layers of lace and a train that stretched for miles. I wanted the elegant venue, a grand ballroom with sparkling chandeliers and a sweeping staircase, where I could make a dramatic entrance and feel like a princess for a day. I wanted the delicious food, the kind that melts in your mouth and leaves you wanting more, not the dry chicken and soggy vegetables that usually graced our dinner table. I wanted the whole shebang, the flowers, the music, the photographer, the dancing, the cake, everything that would make my wedding day a truly unforgettable experience. It was my special day, and after years of feeling like second best, of living in the shadow of my successful sister, I deserved something spectacular. I deserved to feel like a queen, to be surrounded by beauty and love, to have a day that was all about me, a day that would erase the years of feeling inadequate and overlooked. So, we hatched a plan. We wouldn't ask Emily for wedding money directly. We knew she'd disapprove, that she'd see it as frivolous and irresponsible. Instead, we'd continue with the house repairs story, We'd ask for a larger sum, enough to cover both the necessary renovations and the wedding expenses. We'd tell her the roof needed more work than expected, that the plumbing was practically disintegrating, that the foundation was crumbling. We'd paint a picture of a house on the verge of collapse, a desperate situation that required immediate and substantial financial intervention. It felt a bit sneaky, sure, a little bit like playing with fire, but we were desperate. And besides, Emily rarely visited Houston. She was too busy with her high-powered job, her perfect family, and her picture-perfect life in Ohio. She wouldn't know the difference, right? We figured she'd just send the money and be done with it, happy to have fulfilled her familial obligations without having to actually lift a finger. We underestimated her. Emily, it turned out, had a network of informants in Houston, old family friends, distant relatives, and nosy neighbors who seemed to know everyone's business. They were like a flock of well-meaning but ultimately meddling pigeons, cooing their observations and suspicions into Emily's eager ears, and they were all too happy to report back to her about our extravagant spending, our unnecessary purchases, and our suspiciously lavish wedding preparations. The news reached her just weeks before the wedding. I remember the day clearly. I was at work, excitedly finalizing the seating chart and picking out floral arrangements, when my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice, usually warm and sisterly, was now ice cold, her words like daggers piercing my heart. "I know about the wedding," she said, her tone dripping with accusation. "You lied to me. You used me." I felt a wave of panic wash over me, my carefully constructed plan crumbling before my eyes. The room seemed to tilt, the cheerful chatter of my coworkers fading into a distant hum. I tried to explain, to justify our actions, to plead for understanding, but she wouldn't listen. She hung up on me, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding, my dreams of a perfect wedding shattering into a million pieces. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Emily cut off all communication, not just with me, but with our mom as well. She blocked our numbers, ignored our emails, and vanished from our lives as if we had never existed. And then came the financial repercussions. We had booked the venue, hired the caterers, and ordered the flowers, all with the expectation that Emily's money would cover the costs. Now, with the wedding just weeks away, we were facing a mountain of debt. The bills piled up on the kitchen counter, each one a grim reminder of our shattered dreams and our precarious financial situation. We had to make drastic cuts. The elegant venue was replaced with a cheaper, less impressive hall. The gourmet menu was downgraded to a basic buffet. The dream dress I had envisioned was replaced with a simpler, more affordable option. My perfect wedding, the one I had dreamed of since I was a little girl, was now a shadow of its former self, a patchwork of compromises and disappointments. The wedding day arrived, shrouded in a cloud of stress and anxiety. The guests, many of whom were Emily's friends and colleagues, whispered about her absence, their curious glances and hushed conversations adding to my humiliation. My in-laws, unaware of the financial struggles behind the scenes, were less than impressed with the scaled-down celebration. Their thinly veiled criticisms and disappointed expressions added another layer of shame to an already disastrous day. My dream wedding, the one I had hoped would be a symbol of my happiness and success, had become a public spectacle of failure and embarrassment. And it was all because of my sister, the one person I had thought would be there for me, the one person I had trusted with my dreams. The weeks following the disastrous vacation were a relentless assault on my emotional well-being. Every unanswered phone call to Emily, every curt text from Mark, every strained conversation with my parents felt like a hammer blow to my already fragile sense of self. The isolation was suffocating, a heavy blanket of loneliness that wrapped itself around me, squeezing the joy out of life. I tried to reach out to Emily, desperate to explain, to apologize, to somehow mend the shattered fragments of our relationship. But my calls went straight to voicemail, my emails remained unanswered, and my texts met with a chilling silence. The wall she had erected was impenetrable, a fortress guarded by hurt and resentment. My parents, though less hostile, were clearly disappointed in me. Their phone calls, once a source of comfort and support, became infrequent and strained. Their conversations revolved around the weather, the grandkids, anything but the elephant in the room. I could hear the unspoken judgment in their voices, the subtle shift in their tone that spoke volumes about their disapproval, but the most devastating consequence of my actions was the fractured relationship with my brother. Mark, once my confidant, my ally, my partner in crime, had become a stranger. His visits stopped, his phone calls dwindled to awkward, stilted conversations, and his texts were curt and devoid of the warmth and humor that had always characterized our relationship. The bond we had shared since childhood, a bond forged in shared experiences and mutual understanding, had been irrevocably broken. The weight of my isolation pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of regret, the waves of guilt and shame crashing over me, threatening to pull me under. I had sacrificed everything for my family, my career, my dreams, my sanity, all put on hold to raise my children. And yet, here I was, feeling more alone than ever. Nights were the worst. After the kids were finally asleep, the silence of the house would amplify the echoes of my mistakes. I'd lie awake, replaying every conversation, every decision, every misstep that had led me to this point. The what-ifs and if-onlys tormented me, a relentless chorus of self-recrimination. If only I had been more honest with Emily. If only I had paid Mark what he was owed. If only I had listened to my parents' concerns. If only I had been a better sister, a better daughter. The realization that my sacrifices had not been appreciated, that my efforts had been taken for granted, filled me with a bitter resentment. I had given up so much, only to be judged, criticized, and ultimately abandoned by the people I loved most. The unfairness of it all burned in my gut, a constant ache that refused to subside. I had always strived to be a good daughter, the supportive sister, the loving mother, but my efforts had backfired, leaving me feeling like a failure on all fronts. I tried to find solace in my children, their laughter a temporary balm to my wounded soul, but even that felt tainted, overshadowed by the knowledge that my actions had created a rift in our family, a rift that might never fully heal. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The path I had always followed, the path of duty and self-sacrifice, had led me to a dead end. I was at a crossroads, unsure of which direction to take, which path would lead me back to the sense of belonging and connection I so desperately craved. The future stretched before me, uncertain and daunting. I knew I had to make changes, to find a way to balance my needs with the needs of my family, to rebuild the relationships I had damaged. But the question was, where do I even begin? How do you rebuild trust when the foundation has crumbled? How do you apologize when the words feel hollow and inadequate? How do you move forward when the weight of the past threatens to drag you down? These questions haunted me, their answers elusive, their solutions seemingly out of reach. I was trapped in a labyrinth of my own making, the walls closing in, the exit nowhere in sight. The aftermath of the disastrous vacation was like waking up from a fever dream. The world seemed sharper, the colors more vivid, the weight of my mistakes pressing down on me with a renewed clarity, the fallout from my actions, the fractured relationships, the lingering resentment, the gnawing guilt, forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself. I had to acknowledge the ways in which I had contributed to the breakdown of my family, the ways in which my own needs and insecurities had blinded me to the needs and feelings of others. The isolation I had felt during the trip intensified, a heavy blanket of loneliness that threatened to smother me. Emily remained distant, a fortress of hurt and anger that I couldn't penetrate. My parents, though less hostile, were clearly disappointed, their conversations strained, their words laced with a subtle disapproval that stung more than outright condemnation. But the most devastating consequence of my actions was the fractured relationship with my brother. Mark, once my confidant, my ally, my partner in crime, had become a stranger. The easy camaraderie we once shared had evaporated, replaced by an awkward formality that made my heart ache. I spent many sleepless nights wrestling with my demons, replaying every conversation, every decision, every misstep that had led me to this point. The what-ifs and if-onlys tormented me, a relentless chorus of self-recrimination. If only I had been more honest with Emily. If only I had paid Mark what he was owed. If only I had listened to my parents' concerns. If only I had been a better sister, a better daughter. The weight of my regrets was crushing, a heavy burden that I carried with me everywhere I went. I felt like a failure, a fraud, a disappointment to everyone who had ever loved me. But amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope began to emerge. I realized that I couldn't change the past, but I could learn from it. I could use this experience as an opportunity for growth, for self-discovery, for forging a new path forward. I started small, focusing on the things I could control. I made a conscious effort to be more present with my children, to appreciate the joy and laughter they brought into my life. I started taking them on adventures, exploring new parks, and creating memories that weren't overshadowed by my own internal struggles. We baked cookies together, built pillow forts, and had impromptu dance parties in the living room. Their laughter became a lifeline, a reminder of the unconditional love that surrounded me. I also began to reconnect with old friends, the ones who had known me before the weight of motherhood and family drama had consumed me. We met for coffee, went for walks, and had long, overdue conversations about life, love, and everything in between. Their support and understanding were a balm to my wounded soul, and I started exploring my own needs and desires, the parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of expectations and responsibilities. I signed up for a pottery class, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. The feel of the cool clay in my hands, the process of molding and shaping it into something beautiful, was both therapeutic and empowering. Slowly, gradually, I began to heal. The sharp edges of my guilt and resentment softened, replaced by a quiet determination to do better, to be better. I reached out to Emily again, not expecting a response, but simply to express my remorse and my hope for reconciliation. To my surprise, she replied, her words cautious, but not unkind. We began a tentative dialogue, a fragile bridge across the chasm that had separated us. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and the occasional resurgence of old patterns. But I persevered, fueled by a newfound sense of self-awareness and a deep desire to create a healthier, more balanced life for myself and my family. I realized that forgiveness, both for myself and for others, was essential for moving forward. I learned to let go of the anger and resentment that had been poisoning my soul, replacing them with compassion and understanding. I forgave Emily for her judgment, my parents for their disappointment, and even myself for my mistakes. I also learned the importance of setting boundaries, of prioritizing my own needs and desires without sacrificing the needs of my family. I discovered that I could be a loving mother, a supportive sister, and a fulfilled individual, all at the same time. The road ahead was still long, but I no longer felt lost. I had a compass to guide me, a compass powered by self-reflection, honesty, and a deep commitment to personal growth. I had stumbled, I had fallen, but I had risen stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to create a life filled with love, connection, and authenticity. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my family story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with understanding, forgiveness, and a deeper appreciation for the bonds that tie us together.